Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, got the clicker. So again, thanks for that warm introduction. I really sincerely appreciate Dasher inviting me and the rest of you attending this session. So again, I'm the Chief Technologist for America's Data Center and Hybrid Cloud for HPE, so that would encompass everything in our solution portfolio. I spend almost all my time talking about what I think has been tugged at today, helping folks define their living first strategy document and their really 3 to 5 year blueprint. Everyone's 1 year's figured out. You'd be blown away at how much folks can't decide what their 3 to 5 year is, but they're making decisions now that will affect the 3 to 5, causing them to retool, retrain people, and have lost investments on the speed bumps that wreck cars, right? So we spend a lot of time in this. So if you think about some of these industry challenges, or we could also refer to this as noise. I think we're all affected by a lot of noise. Talked about in the previous session, public cloud consumption. Should I go, should I not? How fast, how quickly? What about data-driven enterprise decisioning? Do I need a data lake? All these things, right? Everyone's got a data lake, but really everyone's got a data swamp. Absolutely fact. The largest organizations in the world. So we look at all these things. I would tell you some universal truths, though. So I deal with Fortune 1000. I spend tons of time in Bentonville, the largest corporation in the world. They still need dramatic cost reduction. So mentioned earlier, I need to find efficiency. You're not getting a bigger budget, you're not getting more people. I need to find efficiency. And it's not just about OpEx, CapEx, re-swizzling. It's definitely not about that. I also need to look at these next generation technologies and solutions and what they're going to mean for my business, and really, quite honestly, what the risk factor is for the industry I'm in. And so this is the variant. I spend a lot of time with all the oil and gas, all the retailers, all the consumer packaged goods, the banks, the financial firms, the high-frequency traders, and the list goes on. So we're kind of emerging on these things that are definitely noise, and please take this in good spirit. I kid with folks all the time. Almost everybody's one Gartner conference and one Prineville, Oregon Facebook data center visit away from a seriously bad decision. How many if I'll give you an example of this. Anyone do a tour of duty at Goldman Sachs? If you're at Goldman Sachs and you're in a room with individuals, every single person at the table works for Linus Torvalds out of Portland, Oregon, Kernel.org. Every person at the table. So how many of us have those people on our staffs? Almost no one. But Facebook does, and Google does, and Amazon. So we want continuous integration. Now that doesn't mean one business release a year is the right cadence either. So finding this right balance between business risks, where I'm headed, what economic control I need, and can I actually be the disruptor, not the disrupted? So we deal a lot with disruption, figuring stuff out for folks. So some emerging trends, right? Again, some noise in the industry. Folks have got noise of DevOps for sure as well, or even now no ops. Anybody doing any no ops? Soon it'll be no peeps, no people. Right? At what point do you say, okay, so DevOps for sure. Everything as a service is for sure a trend. So as a service is in a big consumption model shift. And I don't mean everything as a service up in an infrastructure as a service AWS cloud. So you're going to see a rise in the US. Really, it's already started in Canada and it's already dominated in Europe of these Cloud 28 Plus partners, mentioned before, boutique partners that have taken hospital systems or consumer packaged good industry, specific industries, and said, what are the tools needed there? I can provide a public cloud experience at private cloud control. And so that's definitely on the rise big time. I'll give you one example of this. I'm exec sponsor for a lot of large accounts as well as some platinum partners like Dasher. 4 companies stood up an object store as a service, independent of each other, no correlation of account, geography, region, nothing, at 1/2 the cost of Azure or AWS. And they didn't even try to optimize. So there's a big trend coming around this stuff. So everything as a service. I'll give you another example. So we launched a solution, backup as a service. How many folks are sick of every 2 to 3 years putting out an RFP to figure out if you need Tivoli Storage Manager, Data Protector, Commvault, Veeam, et cetera, when you could just figure out what my virtualized backup is, what my cloud backup is, what my bare metal backup is, and how I deal with my legacy system. I just want that as a service using the best of breed tools like the ones I mentioned. So all this is going on. We're definitely still focused a lot as well on Folks have still got to deal with mode 1 operations. How many folks have actually achieved near zero downtime initiatives? Almost no one. If you talk to big shops running SAP or Epic, et cetera, just to quiesce the workloads does not fit into the planned outage window any longer. You could never roll back. You got to have the time, so you need virtual capabilities, and you need quality of service around everything. If you can't measure it, you can't do anything about it. So telemetry's got to come into the system. So where we're headed around this, if you look at all these things, ISV license reduction is a big topic I deal with execs with all the time. If I want dramatic cost reduction, it's not coming from infrastructure. It's coming from the business apps that are running, whether they're commercial off-the-shelf in-house developed or even open source. Those are big, big ticket, and the system integration to bring those to business fruition is even more, right? So I got to do something there. So I'll share with you a universal truth. Most folks think they get this get-out-of-jail-free card once they sign an enterprise license agreement. You can kind of mitigate what you're doing in your consumption models, but I'll share with you a truism. There is no such thing as a true down, only a true up. It's always more. So how do I do about that? So what I'm talking about here, in this living strategy document, what's my commercial off-the-shelf software, in-house developed versus off-the-shelf versus cloud? How do I find the right balance for my organization? Dealing with all these things going on, and what's my risk factor I'm in? And am I being disrupted? A lot of folks are in denial about being disrupted. I just was with ExxonMobil in Argentina a week ago. So would you think ExxonMobil, Fortune 3 is being disrupted? Well, I tell you, they're not being disrupted by seismic discovery in an oil field. But you can buy gas as a service here in California. You just order it on your phone. They come and fill your 2 vehicles in your thing, skip the whole filling station altogether. No Red Bulls are bought, nothing. It's out. It's gone. Think about that in every industry. So could you get efficient enough moving to everything as a service and build these models around repeatability, capability, and efficiency to get to that efficiency point? And so we'll kind of go through this a little more. So I want to give you a little backdrop. We think about this innovation agenda, right? To me, innovation is the practical application of the possible to solve these problems. Too often in the past, our company, which you know well over the years, has always built solutions for the very largest organizations, but not scalable down to small. We need scalable solutions and capability, economic control, and reasonable consumption models around these areas. So it became really important for us as we redesigned our new company to be able to get small so we could grow and be able to be aligned to solutions, so move the barrier of entry way down. So you're going to see as we emerge forward, what we really need, if you could have an aspirational goal for an organization, first of all, I need a repeatability. You're going to see high-velocity IT infrastructure be part of this. And you're going to definitely see I'm having 10 conversations a week around public cloud consumption versus private versus colo versus hosted. These are all constructs of the data center, plus OT. Now all of a sudden we're in a world where OT and IT are touching. OT folks never talked to IT folks ever before. So that means all the global network routing is wrong. All my backup recovery archive is probably wrong because they're 3 separate solutions. So I got to do something about all this holistically. So I need to bring innovation into this to be able to ramp this up, but also decide, could I predict 5 years from now where my organization needs to be and make that decision now? This is really important. So we talk about this as tomorrow belongs to the fast. It's about continuous ideation around value. So, and I say this to CIOs all the time, what always worries me is what didn't fit on the dashboard because you couldn't fund it. It's hundreds of transformations at once. I was with the CIO of Rogers Communication in Canada, #1 in Canada, and we spent, his whole staff was in, and we spent several hours, and they kept going on how they were modernizing their data center footprint. Well, modernization is simply getting out of technical debt. You need to be transforming. Modernization is just catching up. As soon as you catch up, the puck will have moved. Can I make the right decisions now to get there? What we need to be able to happen in this specific IT world we're in now, I need to have the ability to have a new individual hired onto staff who could deploy web app and database services with no subject matter expertise whatsoever of the infrastructure. That gives me full repeatability, programmability, and velocity. I need velocity. I got to ramp up fast, so this gets into controversial subjects. In the modern world of things, I would never trouble ticket to do provisioning and automation, ever. I would go there and fail it and reconsume it. I need composability to reconsume. Trouble ticketing is for long-lasting systems. Now, I need trouble ticket when I get to L3, L4 stuff, right? Deep integral stuff. So these gets into this new continuous value creation that we have to spin towards, right? So the fun part I work on is really the middle here, the transforming and soon to be transformed across all industries, of trying to think ahead. What could you do from a velocity, from an agility perspective, to be the company that is in the lead? And it's not just, sometimes it's listening to peers, sometimes it's best of breed technologies. So we'll get into this a little bit more. So when we think about this, and you guys have seen some version of this before, so we're all focused on some level of IT transformation. And a lot of that for folks is adoption of public cloud resources. But even right now, if you were to look at the stats, and I review these stats every month, what are the real numbers? Because we all get caught from the senior leadership saying, why aren't you moving faster? How come some bucket's not there? So we're living right now in a $1 trillion IT industry. 1 trillion. Who would want to make a guess on what Amazon Web Services, the #1 public cloud provider's best year ever was? 13 billion out of 1 trillion. Yeah, 100% is in the public cloud, right? So what's the real thing here for my organization? Because what happened in 2016 and now 2017, it became possible to have a colo hosted private on-prem. The construct varies by organization. Varies by geography, age of data center, capital acquisition, beliefs, all these things, it shifted. So now I can actually do these things and have a hybrid model to this. It's going to be some in public for sure. But mostly right now, a lot of folks, as said before, DR's there for sure. Public cloud's a great way to start fast. Start ideation on a project to see if it's viable. But what folks have made the mistake on is they believe that it will live there forever. Imagine if all of a sudden you have a $30 million a month bill, which I've got several organizations that do. So do that math times 12. And 30 million will be 32, 33, 34, 35. And then imagine the next year they say take 20% out of your IT spend. You have no control to take that out. So you got to find that right balance. Back to the example that was given before. So who believes when 1/3 of the internet was down for 6 hours with a significant AWS outage, that all those people simply didn't have the insight to develop a DR HA capability? Or do you think it was really expensive? But I would submit to you this as well. It is absolutely not adequate for standard operating procedure on a Tier 0, Tier 1 app to be in an availability zone. You need to be in another public cloud provider. That's how you'd run a data center. And no one has the portability to do it. If you're simply mad at them, could you move it to another public cloud provider, or would you have to fully rewrite the applications? Do you have a data portability model? Do you have a data model from OT to IT to public? Where is the data? Because data is what we care about. This has become the new level to think about hybrid transformation. It's not just about moving O365. This is always the funny one. I go to folks that says, I'm heavily in Azure. I'm like, what, O365? Yet I bet you no one in here actually has Office 365. I bet you everybody's got Exchange 365. Who's using the in-the-browser client? Oh, there's a couple. I'm actually impressed. Almost everybody still has the fat client. They just moved the Exchange server. So it became like a movement. And so what we're talking about is this agility piece. So what we want to focus on is how do we make IT transformation and business operation transformation come together in the middle? We talked about this already. So it's hundreds of simultaneous transformations going on at once, not this serial fashion of let's invest in the big projects. This is what's on our budgeted landscape for this year. How could I do this? Could I retool to do hundreds of transformations simultaneously to arrive at the goal of the 3 to 5 year blueprint? Do I know what the 3 to 5 year blueprint should be? Or am I just looking at things on the innovation agenda? Like I'll go and folks will have, everyone's seen the dashboard, folks will say blockchain. Anybody in here looking at blockchain? Do you know why? Or is it, I gotta look at it? Contracts, there we go. So there's a great example, but a lot of folks got blockchain out there, next generation Hadoop, Apache Spark, new container orchestration with Kubernetes, Mesosphere, all the above, and they got 17 runbook tools, and it's like, oh, I got to look at Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack, and I'm like, well, at what point is it not scalable? Could I just decide on where I need my efficiency point? This is this hybrid transformation world we're in, right? It's a tough piece. This is what we talked about before, so this is an interesting one. If you looked at DevOps movement, DevOps actually has nothing to do with microservices. Another lost in translation noise piece from senior leaders. It's agile processes applied to mode 1 and mode 2. But most folks are like, I'll rewrite things to cloud native. Right now, 1.1% of applications are cloud native in the whole of the industry, 1.1%. So you even see a movement with Docker themselves is to containerize a mode 1 app, not transform it or rewrite it. Transforming or rewriting it to where you just let the developer choose development tools. If you talk to big organizations, which I do all the time, they're doing continuous integration of code into production that's poor quality. Poor quality is like a go-out-of-business strategy, right, when you're doing it at vast scale. So you just got to find this right capability around not move everything just to a DevOps model. But we all are caught, right, because we have cost constraint and we have people constraint. So I tell this to folks all the time. In 2017, ROI moved from being return on investment to return on individual. I can't afford all those SMEs. Depends on what company I'm at, what geographic location. You go out to Palo Windows in Palo, Iowa. Do you think they got the folks that are working at Goldman Sachs? I was just at Schneider National, the big trucking company in Green Bay. They don't have them either. I was just at 3M in Minneapolis. Nope, they don't have them either. I was just at Nike. Nope, they don't have them either. So who does get to have them? So you have to think about this, right? Do I have repeatable processes, right? And what's going on in this space, or am I just sort of creating this? Because now we're in this new world of, I need to think about distributed compute. I'm going to consume compute everywhere. That's a foregone conclusion. AWS, Azure, Cloud 28 Plus partners, Colo hosted. In the previous session, Epic in the cloud. SAP wants HANA in the cloud, HANA Enterprise Cloud. Oracle wants to sell the cloud. So now it's their sort of problem to give you the capabilities of your tier 1 applications. But I have to think about where the distributed data is. And really, the holy grail is to have multi-cloud brokerage. Can I see all locations and make an informed decision where I should be now? Cost, SLA, a long-term viability, scale to production, all these things. Could I make an intelligent choice? And because it's not cost. Anybody attend the Gartner conference 2 weeks ago? Did I see any hands? So Gartner came out for the first time ever and says, never go to public cloud for cost. That is a reversal of 3 years ago. But you go there for fast time to value, agility, you want to ideate, all these things, DR, all the normal reasons, but it's not for cost. So we have to sort of think about where am I at in this. So I do need a multi-cloud brokerage ability in an organization, and that's inclusive of vSphere. Number one private cloud is vSphere, folks. That's still 82%. So a vSphere cloud, a KVM, a Hyper-V, an Azure Stack, AWS with EC2 and S3, plus the Azure 65 APIs. Can I look at them as I rationalize my application portfolio and come up with a way to be portable if I have to change my mind? Lots of reasons. Leadership change, developer change, application portfolio change, acquisition, merger. And the new piece too is, can I build in analytics and visualization into the development model, not bolted on? So just a few things around these waves of opportunity. We talked about, new evolving applications and delivery methods. And a lot of folks would choose SaaS apps first. I heard that, and I hear this all the time. If there's a SaaS app you can get, you're probably going to want to do it. But then over time, is that really the end of where things are going? Software-defined everything is at the heart of everyone's decision tree. Everyone's still hardware-defined. Even the first-generation converged systems, which folks use, whether they're vBlocks or CS700s from us or anything you can name, was simply better racking. You still had to log into every subcomponent with a subject matter expert to update firmware. That is not software-defined. I need high-velocity, software-defined. I was with Sony Entertainment Networks 2 weeks after their large breach. With manual network rules, it would have taken 40 days to stop the pipes. Software-defined 40 seconds. That's high velocity, which means I could recompose and grab it back too. So we're emerging on this new world, right? Because of threats and security endpoints, all these things going on, and just the ability to change the economic control. As said before, to find efficiency, new levels of efficiency. We also have this whole massive data expansion going to turn on. You guys have probably been at lots of conferences year after year where folks talk about this, right? But the OT spigots are not on at all. And the ideal goal is on OT, you don't backhaul to the data center. And that data center, let's pretend it is AWS. That's still a data center, right? I'm not going to backhaul all that. I need to make a data insight right in the moment. I don't have time to backhaul, plug it into an Oracle database, scan through it, punch out a report, hand it to a senior business leader 3 weeks later and say, what do you think? Well, it already happened. So I'll give you why this has become, if you look at the very bottom, this is a little bit heavy duty for most folks. We need some technology breakthroughs to solve some of this. We're all constrained by the Moore's Law effect. We absolutely are. So I was with State Farm Insurance. I grew up in Central Illinois. So State Farm Insurance is in Bloomington, Illinois. Very, very marquee company, right? They have about 100 petabytes of data in their walls around claims, agents, people, clients, et cetera. So they gave us a challenge. They said, I'd like real-time insight to 100 petabytes of data. The average organization uses 8% of the data stored in their walls and has a minimum of 26 copies of the same exact thing. Data marts, snapped off reporting instances, lost truth. What if the business said, I want to use 20% of my data, go from 8 to 20, could you do it? And the answer would be no. So a lot of folks' first strategy documents is to go to a unified data center fabric to sort of solve some of this. Get an interconnect that's better. So I'll give you a data point. State-of-the-art 40 gig E for most of us that could afford it, or if you have a lot of money, 100 gig E. It would still take you 39 years to move 100 petabytes of data. First generation photonics on the near horizon, 30 hours. Real-time insight, down from 26 copies to probably 2. That's simplification. I need a bunch of things in that space to change how I think about compute. I need to turn the whole model upside down. I also need to have programmable infrastructure. So you hear this concept, and you maybe heard it this morning, infrastructure as code. I need to write to programmable infrastructure. It does what it's supposed to do. I have repeatable models, and everything is a service. And I don't care about the infrastructure as much. So we did a study, we hired this study done, and we used 3 independent consulting firms to do it, and they polled 1,000 companies around first-generation private clouds, on-prem, public hosted, et cetera. There was one universal reason why all first-generation private clouds failed, regardless of size of organization or what industry they're in. Anyone want to take a guess? Inability to change the operating model. 3 tiers of storage, 3 tiers of compute, 3 tiers of network, lots of SMEs that hug it all, capacity planners on top of it, long gestation cycles, or I choose nothing from Amazon. You can choose nothing about the hardware you're on. Make no mistake. The average age of the kit's 8 years old. So when you go there, it seems like you win the lottery. So I'm the exec sponsor for a large pharmaceutical. And so they took on-prem assets that was taking them 16 hours to do a biological compound simulation. Now, you have to do about 10,000 simulations before you get to accuracy on bringing a drug to market. So that means, 9,000 and some are wrong answers. So they went from 16 days on-prem to 6 business days in an AWS cloud because they had access to a lot more resources than they could afford. Well, I had to break it to them. Their nearest competitor had put an on-prem hybrid cloud GPU compute cluster and could do it in 6 hours. 6 days to 6 hours. So this is another thing to think about when you're consuming. Do you have an edge? Are you going there for economic control, fast time to market? You just want to be out of the data center business, want someone else to manage it, or do you have an edge? Because everyone's the same in the public cloud consumption. You can't choose to be different. You can't say, put it on an SGA 8600 water-cooled 80 kilowatt system with 4,000 GPUs. That's called colo. So you have to think about this, and we're starting to see this tug, and as as Al mentioned before, we had 112 companies come back just through into 2016 and 2017 who had been out in the public cloud system for about 3.5 years. And I'm not trying to dissuade you from public cloud consumption. I'm just telling you, we're at this different intersection point where cost economics have flattened out, control points have flattened out, new business models are now forcing people to different regions. The good thing that cloud drove is that it drove the concept of efficiency, that we now could do it in a different way versus the old traditional way. So really important piece. So we talked through most of this, so I'm going to skip a bit of it, right? We're definitely seeing also a really heavy emergence of open source moving beyond the OS. Folks really considering databases at the heart of what they do. Now, don't get me wrong. I was with a large health provider in Minneapolis. You guys can work out who it is. They're Fortune 5, who said, we're moving 100% off of Oracle to no SQL. That's about a 12-year journey and probably $500 million, and you would never get close. So there's this sort of like, what is tangible for my risk of my business versus what do I have to consume in a different way? If you're on Epic, you're on Epic. Epic doesn't go, I'm going to put no SQL at the back. Oracle doesn't say they're not going to put 12c at the back. This is the challenge to like trying to chip away at some of this. Or you could start developing your own applications. So all these things are going on simultaneously. We talked about programmable infrastructure, DevOps, cloud native, and high velocity constructs come together, as well as disaggregation modular. What we're heading towards, and we started this journey, we probably start realizing this journey in 2018. You're going to see a point where everything is a fluid resource pool. There is no demarcation between network, compute, and storage any longer. They're just pools of resources. And you snap an elastic cloud on them, and they're extensible in nature. They're 100% utilized, and they're 100% uptime. We're heading there fast. We've started this journey. We'll complete a big chunk of this journey in 2018. And this is kind of why, right? So this was a great sign here in the Bay Area from, co-founder of Intel, Gordon Moore, how we govern IT complexity, right? This is the speed of change. What I was talking about before is this. The world we live in of using the Oracles and the Epics and the SAP and the Amdocs billing, and I can go on forever and all the commercial off the shelf that we use, but I need dramatic cost reduction, so I need to use that stuff on the right. But when things go bump in the night, who answers the call? Some from application that's developed with Ruby on Rails, JSON scripts, Jenkins, GitHub. It sounds awesome. So the point is find a balance. And so folks are now putting programmatic control in this balance and trying to look at, we stood up a Pathfinder innovation ecosystem for exactly this reason. First of all, it was to partner, to incubate, but also to vet out technologies for you folks so you could guess what the right technologies to bet on. So it's not risks to your business, but you also don't spin a lot of cycles. Take a look back to the example of an HDFS distribution or a data lake. A few years ago, you would have picked Cloudera number one, but now would you pick Cloudera, would you pick Hortonworks? Or would you pick next year MapR? Or the next year a different one after that? Could you support 4 technologies? I doubt it. So betting on the right technologies, that's looking at that 5-year visioning so you can have the hybrid control model that you need. This is why it's being driven this way. So I've been doing this 26 years. Bulk of us spend our career here. You stand up a monolithic app where you can capacity plan, some amount of storage, network, compute. Now I live in this world of loosely coupled services that exist everywhere. A chunk of a Veron EC2 stored on S3, a chunk backhauls to my on-prem data center, a chunk over to Equinix, data pipe rack space, and it's this loosely coupled app that was written that I now have to put a tier 1, tier 0 wrapper around and say I pull all the levers. This is where it becomes really challenging. So I would advise folks with Dasher to do one of these assessments, a real short duration assessment. I'm not talking about these long-running things. Nobody wants to hear about that. Really short assessment to look at the things and validate what you know about hybrid transformation and consumption, but what you don't. Because we've learned a lot in the last 3 or 4 years around doing this. It's really a great exercise because what's happened is everyone ended up back here. The folks the farthest ahead sort of are back at this point of what's the next journey I need to take. Because no one said that you achieved your cost reduction, please stop. I have to keep going more and more, and I have to move faster on application and delivery of business. I have to continue to reduce costs, and I got to do it somehow with less and less people. How do I get to that point? And there's no magic, as said before, of I can't just rely on the folks in the public cloud or just the ones managing the assets anymore. That's not a reality, right? In fact, in a lot of cases, folks who've stood up those models because they were told to, you need twice as many resources while you're doing it. We know about refactoring to bimodal. I think you guys know this piece, right? We're all stuck here of then trying to find this velocity of change that we need to do around these cloud-ready applications. Where should I be in the cloud? Who should I use? Should I really be in Azure? Should I be in AWS? Should I be over in rack space that's AWS compliant? Should I just do it with one of these new emerging partners that's in a partner ecosystem so I have the control? There's no one answer for all of this, right? I think you got to do some of all of it. We call that the right mix. Having this hybrid control place where you look at your assets, your estate, and you determine in probable vectors what percentage of the applications will be in each of those venues for execution for a period of time. That's a great exercise to do. It gives you really good clarity around it because we're really right at this life at this intersection of velocity and disruption. Could I design for consistent performance, always on availability, composable openness to be able to reconsume with multidimensional flexibility, but then all the way to the edge? And I have a unified model to all of it. This is really important when you look at security exposure, as well as data models, as well as the copies of data you have to move around to get business insight to it. I need to look universally across the whole estate, wherever it lives, no matter what you've decided on a consumption model. So that's the right mix we talk about of defining, powering, and optimizing. And this is, I'm not here to give you a deep dive on this today, but it does do a great service to organizations on understanding, again, this clarity around what locations, when and why and how you should be there. I'll give you a good example of this. This same pharmaceutical I mentioned, they were enamored that VMware announced that you could vMotion your workloads from an on-prem estate to AWS. This actually works quite well if you've ever tried it. So who believes that vMotioning a workload does anything with the data? They were vMaxes on-prem. So you're going to be an S3 or an archive store that's, well, and then you go, what if I got to bring it back? This is where things like Nimble Cloud Volumes and things like Cumulo, Global NAS have come in. I changed the presentation layer because that's a trail of tears. If you go up and have to come back and have to transform that data, that is seriously problematic. So you really got to think about the data model, as I talked about before, not just moving a workload in a hosted VM. That's easy. We can all do that. That's easy, and I can look at that. That's also the #1 mistake for cost analytics. The cost per VM per hour is what everyone looks at. They don't look at IOP rates on reserved instance, on how chatty their app is based on geographic location for backhauling. So folks, egress data is what's usually killed them by 18 months in. Egress data, because it's a variable rate. No one likes variable budget. You can take some level of variability, but not wide swings. And that's data's wide swings. So if SAP ECC is on-prem and you put BW up in AWS, which is totally technically possible, BW only sources from ECC. There's no other data point it comes from, although you could plug in things from Teradata and Netezza, et cetera. But I'm going to thrash the data back and forth. Now, if you're in rack space data pipe and you have a cross-connect, you've sort of solved a piece of it. But if you're in your own data center, IOPS are a fortune, an absolute fortune, adult money. So just think about placement. So you need to look at workload placement, but the hybrid operating model, and so this depicts it really well, of it's every data center, the edge, your own, the colo, the host, the public. Those are all the construct of the data center. Look where the workload lifecycle will be and how I provide tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 constructs around it, depending on how you classify the app. And this often gets lost in just the race to do something to get economic control around it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Saving costs is really important to the whole industry, right? Which brought into this. So you want programmable infrastructure. Now, folks have ventured into this kind of racing into it, and some folks kind of slowly. Some organizations, for example, have written their own global API. I would tell you it's nearly impossible to write your own global API and ever keep up with it. You need to go to some REST standard that everyone uses, because your own global API will be a bottleneck in and out. Now, you may be able to get good security control around that global API, which large organizations do, but it's very slow in. And as soon as the industry shifts, like anybody familiar with Gen Z? So Gen Z is a big initiative. 100 companies are involved. We're a big dominant player. Gen Z lets you program applications across a vast estate of resources and keep the NUMA model intact. That's the next big wave. You don't care anything about where it is. If you had to write that in the global API, you would have written it wrong. So there's so many changes coming so think about programmability in an API, but use something like REST that has compatibility with everyone. Everyone's weighed in on. So we talked to this already before. Folks are now standing up these hybrid clouds, right? The multi-cloud public consumption model, a hosted cloud for some of the reasons. On-prem clouds plus specialized cloud, but putting a single operating model across all of them. That's the key. You need a cloud management platform or a marketplace to see all the destinations at once to make an informed decision where you should put workload placement. And that's containers, bare metal, virtual machines, and all the above. Different storage constructs, backup recovery constructs, and even network. Networks are hard, right? These are where everyone's eyes glaze over. When you start getting into underlays and overlays and what you need to be actually pull this off, this is quite complex. So what we're talking about here is having predictive supply and elastic supply across multiple sourcing models. So if you can write your 3 to 5 year blueprint to show these where you need elastic supply for parts of your business and parts where you need predictive, you can actually drive the financial model around it as well as the repeatability. So it's this definite balancing act, right, and this varies a lot by industry. I tell you there's no universal answer. You do weigh in a bit on certain industries. For example, retailers are primarily not in AWS. What would you think the reason would be? Because Amazon really is a dead competitor. They want to put them out of business. So they're not in AWS. So then if you eliminated AWS out of the mix as a choice point, for whatever reason, that would leave you with Azure, and then a bunch of boutique. So really finding this right balance becomes really important around these different control points, right? And latency is always a piece. Some folks are lucky in latency and some are not. If you've been geographically dispersed in the right latency domain, you could solve a lot of these things. But if you're really far apart, then latency is always going to be the enemy here. No WAN connect up to a public cloud provider is as fast as a LAN connect, no matter what money you have, even if they cross-connect your network. So Microsoft did a direct bridge to Walmart's network. Walmart said, too much security problems, we're not doing it. Okay, we'll take that off your shoulders. We'll direct connect. So I solved the security piece, primarily, at least as good as everyone else can solve it, but I still didn't solve the latency. And I can't solve that latency piece, so you really got to think about latency domains of where these different applications are going to be. And a lot of applications are latency tolerant. It doesn't matter at all, and you can live with them. Depends on the industry a lot. I'll go to manufacturers, and because they have a cloud-first strategy, they're taking all their manufacturing apps up to the public cloud. And if you've ever been in remote locations with manufacturers where WAN links are spotty at best, might not even be on DSL, would you rely on the fact that you could keep a manufacturing line running on poor interconnect? This is really hard decisions, right? But there's this dominant force going on. You guys know this well, so I won't go through it. I would encourage you to go through this exercise to get to this piece, the best execution venue for the next 2 to 3 years across infrastructure, service, hybrid, SaaS, hosted, on-prem, and non-cloud applications, stuff that can't be clouded. But more importantly, to do this piece around business, financial, technical, and functional capabilities. What I found is most folks have 3 or 4 of these nailed in every category. This is a really small subset, by the way. This is a fraction of what you should care about. Because you cared about them all this other time. All of a sudden, it's not a care anymore because it's someone else's data center, and I'm just writing to an API. If I write to EC2 or there's 90 services in Amazon, I'll just use Kinetic Service or Lambda. No ops, I'll just say don't care, don't care, don't care. At some point, don't care, you care. So you got to look at these different pieces on where you're placing the workloads, and this is true for on-prem as well. On-prem clouds are not always very efficient. So I need to find that efficiency point, but look across these core characteristics around lifecycle management all the way to economic control. Here's a good example of this that we've having conversations on a lot. Had a traditional app on MySQL and Microsoft SQL. So I take the journey, like I said. I've got to dramatically decrease costs, so I move from commercial off-the-shelf purchase software to open source, Hadoop, OSS, Cassandra, right? To then let's just take the next step and move to APIs. Where do I go from there? If you go, I'm done, I don't like the coffee Jeff Bezos drinks, I'm going to go to Azure now. Well, there's no EC2 or S3 APIs in Azure. And there's none on-prem either. So just think about that. When you write to the APIs, can you write to an API that works everywhere? This is about that programmable repeatability piece, right? So just think about that in cloud. And there's some things you're going to have no choice. SaaS app's going to be hosted where it's going to be hosted. If you're going to purchase front office applications, they're just going to be where they're going to be because you're buying them by the drink. But other parts of your middle office analytics and back office, you do really need to think about placement and portability if you have to change your mind. This is the new thinking of hybrid cloud that wasn't even there 2 years ago of, can I think data model, can I think integrity, can I take flexibility, can I take portability into the model? I think folks think about it. Most folks think about it. It's just how do you accomplish it? Containers are one mechanism to do this. A container can move between all the clouds pretty portably, but of course, unfortunately, a container can't handle all your size workloads either. We know about complexity. I'm going to kind of skip through this. So if you look at this high-velocity IT construct, I need programmable infrastructure as code. I got to bring in different levels of automation, and I've got to build the intelligence into the holistic view of the IT stack, which folks don't do generally because it's too hard. And how do I bring agile processes into the whole model to help me move faster? This is a hybrid framework. We'll share this with you. I'm not going to read it up here on the stage. Software defined at the heart of everything you do. Elastic to predictive supply consumption models. Composability in everything you're going to do. And then think in fluid resource pools. Define, optimize, this much more detail on it. I talked to this before. This is the really hard one for organizations. How do I find the right cadence of business release for my applications? It's not 12 a day for most organizations, or 20 a day, or 1 an hour. But it's not 1 a year. Because 1 a year is why everybody went out. 56% of the IT spend right now in specific industries is outside the CIO's budget because of speed. It's not because of functionality, you could do it better, it's just speed, time to value. But if I could change this and find the right cadence, you could take all those dollars and bring them back inwards. I always give folks this example. I have a 7-year-old daughter. She goes to a private Christian school, but I still have to pay public school education too. When you're paying for public resources, you're still paying for the private data center as well. It didn't just go away. So if I could turn those resources in, just think how awesome of a private hosted on-prem solution I could do and get, if I had the speed to do it. Well, it's possible for sure to get to that point. So we're talking about frictionless software-defined when you think about these different constructs in the middle. If I can bring this into the mix, and we've been able to help accomplish this for a few organizations. Most folks get part of the way there, and then they get operationally bound around folks that hug. And this is just part of our discipline. We've all been in the industry a long time. Has anyone ever been involved in a project where there were enough network ports? Or there was enough LUNs and LDEVs on the storage arrays, or where they always have to buy more? That's operational model challenges. Amazon and Azure, it's unlimited. You assume it's just an infinite pool. You could just keep consuming against it. Internally, I'm financially constrained. I can't. So new models have come in around flexible capacity models and stuff to give you on-demand provisioning so you don't have to have this big capital asset allocation all the time. So this is really part of it as well. I think we talked to this a little bit. You may have had it in a previous session. There's a new change in how folks are looking at hybrid transformation or hybrid infrastructure. If you look at traditional siloed, and this is still the dominant force in IT today, I pick some level of storage based on the tiering or capacity or IOPS. This is changing. This is what I was tugging at before. If you look at the Moore's Law effect, even our smallest storage platform we ship now can do 2 million IOs. 2 million. So who has a 2 million IO database? Almost no one. Where a few years ago you had to pick by throughput, fan out, scale, SLA, how many nines of availability, data center services, replication to data centers, all these things. And now all of a sudden I go, you can do it with everything in our portfolio. So the decision tree changed really big time. Same thing going on in networking. So we shifted from where I had to make these physical capacity specific constructs around how I built siloed infrastructure to now we're at this composable piece where everything's composable, everything's fluid, everything's programmable, and I can make higher velocity choices and have a lot more repeatability, which dramatically drives down the cost. But more importantly, brings simplicity into the mix where just generalists deploy. This is generalists deploy it, not subject matter expertise deploying. I don't need to know anything about the infrastructure at all. Nothing. So I'll show you an enhanced example of this. Anybody seen this before? This is an absolute fact. This isn't marketing. It's not PowerPoint magic. So this would be a typical workload deployment by every organization that I've ever been with. The size of the buckets will change depending on the workload. Blades versus rackable and back and forth, density optimized. The size and tier of storage. I would usually use this to deploy a workload. As I move forward with the new face of hybrid infrastructure, I could do all that with that. That's available now. That's 10-to-1 device reduction. It's 40x data compaction. It's 100x data compaction to the cloud. Integrated backup recovery archive. And it also will bring in telemetry. Based on some acquisitions, we'll bring telemetry into everything we do. I will autonomically solve the service before you're involved. We have a portfolio under, and I'm going to talk about product today. We have a portfolio that we acquired that has had 30,000 installs, has had no level 1 or level 2 tickets ever issued, ever solved before anyone knew about it. We'll implement that across the whole portfolio. So we'll take dramatic data services, compaction, simplicity, generalist level deployment, telemetry, so AI for the data center comes in. You can see quickly I didn't have then the ability to have a hybrid cloud capability that has a lot of the attributes that what Amazon and Azure have been able to accomplish with significant amount of time, effort, and spend. I can now do at a small scale. This is the big goal for organizations. Then on top of that, I need a single view into it all. That's coming in December. We've been in beta for a long time, and again, I'm not here to talk about product. I'd be able to see all these locations and all these venues for execution and make a choice around portability. So I'm kind of at time here. I wanted to open it up for a few questions if there were, so I think there's some mic runners around. Yeah, so.
I have a loud voice. I have 2 questions.
Sure, I can hear you.
The first one, I think everybody in this audience must have. Have you considered moving to decaf?
Good one. I actually don't even drink coffee, which is really scary.
The more serious one. You mentioned something maybe halfway through about people move to the cloud and it's not necessary, or Gardner, I think you said it's not necessarily cheaper, and yet I'm sure every time you go out and talk to customers, big, small, you probably get some of that. I'm just wondering, you probably have heard every reason or anecdotal story about why they think it is. Does it come down to people just thinking, well, we're better at this, so there's not sprawl, or I'm just trying to understand why? We know we sell customers, and there's nothing here against the cloud either, but we definitely get a lot of people who think, yeah, it's cheaper, right?
Yeah, if
a pervasive answer in your mind as to why.
If it's ideation on a project, it's definitely less upfront cost, right, than standing up a large, again, this is back to the wrong operating model though. I would stand up a large stack of IT technology to test out a small application, because that's just how I always did it. Versus there, you just go, I try a little hosted VM, touch a little bit of services, nah, that didn't work, shut it down, although that's another story. Most folks spending a fortune right now on variable public cloud costs is because developers never shut down the instances. They just live forever. So what we found, and again, this is observation from watching it for about 4 years. In the first hour, in the first day, in the first week, in the first month, it's probably less. But you're really small in scale in those stages. As you scale to promote to production on any, let's say, tier 0, 1 through 2 app, maybe not a tier 3, you get to a point where you cross over and it's not less expensive. But I agree with you, that would be stage 1 of technology grieving denial for most organizations. They would think it's less expensive. And in some stages it is less expensive, especially if you said, you know what, I got a 22-year-old data center. So everyone has a different piece to this, right? Some of it's just they're sick of wrestling with folks around getting the right infrastructure at the right time frame. They just can't wrestle anymore. The Nexus guys can't give me the ports I want. The Brocade guys over here, you know, the storage guys are like, I just can't deal with this anymore. I need to stand up an application. So, you know, the cost of inaction is also quite high. We spent a lot of time, and I could show you an interesting presentation that I've done on cost of inaction. So there is a time where there is economic value for sure in public cloud. I would never say there's not. But these type of solutions, this is way less than half the cost of any public cloud provider to provide this same exact service, no matter how you would cut the metrics. And that's just TCA, not even TCO. Because everyone who also says they do TCO analysis always does total cost of acquisition. They do not do TCO. No one ever tells you, oh, I had to hire the Oracle consultants to tune Oracle 12c, and that's $400 an hour. That's TCO. TCA is just, oh, I looked at it, and I said I did TCO, and it's bomb to bomb. But it didn't show you that it saved you the $50,000 licenses if you did it this way. And remember, the models up there, too, are bring your own license. Can you really optimize licenses? You can sure optimize. So there's some of this is just, I think it's just learning that's come in. But the general gravity of things is folks are heading to public cloud at a fast clip rate, for sure. We have no doubt about it. That's why we think, though, it's a hybrid. You'll have some percentage in all locations. The rise of these boutique players is going to, I think, give. So if you were in Europe, the Cloud 28 Plus partners are actually more dominant than AWS Azure. Now, some of that, to be brutally transparent, was geographic location. They just didn't have the presence. Plus data sovereign boundaries and all these things you get into in other regions. Now, did anybody read that? So General Electric just is standing up a new wind turbine farm over in European region. Did you see this? Microsoft bought 100% of all the capacity before it ever went live, because they're going to build several new Azure data centers because they can't cover it. You're not going to backhaul to the US. Latency. So think there's a mix coming where you're going to have some different economic models for folks to look at. Now that's outside of the SaaS model that was being talked about before. Epic hosted, Cerner hosted, Amdocs hosted is definitely the trend that the application providers are heading towards. That's a tough one. That's a tougher one. But the broader market's still not there, right? If you listen to those statistics I had before, folks are doing, I mean, hyper-converged market's a $2 billion market right now, $2 billion annually. Storage is $50 billion. So folks are still spending a lot of, now it might not be in your data center anymore. So it's also about the optics of what cloud equals. And I think somebody mentioned that before, just explaining to somebody what cloud is, you know, like, So other questions? Again, it's hybrid right mix. It's finding the right venue for execution for our workload, and then figuring out what its life cycle is. Yes, go ahead.
Only because you brought it up, data sovereignty.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have these conversations all the time, and you probably avoid these conversations, but ultimately, how are we going to fix that problem?
Well, I think being talked about before, you have to implement teams that understand the segmentation of the data and what boundaries it can cross and not cross, or over-rotate and make it really stringent, but as soon as you do that, you probably insert some cost models. So it's a tough one. Brutally honest, a lot of organizations, I wouldn't say like they're intentionally ignoring it, but in some ways they're ignoring it.
A specific example is we were just informed by a customer utility in Europe that even our customer support system,
Yeah,
how am I going to do follow the sun support
right.
if I can't access the data
Yeah.
from, in the same part of the world? I mean, it just...
It's definitely, I think, getting more complex as we go. Here's another one that's coming in 2018. If you watched our Gen 10 launch, we launched Silicon Root of Trust. Anybody who's investigated that, if you haven't. Very, very high fines if you can't prove that the actual firmware is secure on your compute. Have to prove it. At the level of HIPAA, PCI compliance and stuff, you have to be able to provability. It's significant fines. So there's more regulation coming, not less. And I think it's going to be harder for folks to find this and just navigate through it, right? It's an unfortunate piece of it, but some of it's good that is coming. Some of it, I think, just slows down innovation a little bit, if all of us have lived it. And I agree with, it was being talked about before. I've spent a lot of time in the pharmaceutical industry, a lot, all of the names you can think of. And it became shocking how the different interpretation of the regulation. One company was massively slow because they overinterpreted, and another probably underinterpreted. And finding that right interpretation, which I guess gets you through, is also important. You know, because you can really over-rotate, which means you can do nothing. So it's a really hard one. Other questions? I know I'm at time here, so. I appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for having me at the event.